What would you do if someone mocked you in a language they assumed you couldn't understand, only for you to answer in that exact language perfectly? Today's story begins right here, with a CEO who thought he could humiliate a quiet waitress, but in just a few seconds, everything turned against him. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Marisol Hale had learned to read the rhythm of a busy Seattle evening, the way some people read sheet music, quiet cups clinking from the corner table, the soft murmur of conversations blending under the dim amber light, the sound of the espresso machine singing its familiar tune. The Harborview Lounge wasn't fancy, not the kind of place that made it onto travel magazines. But it was the kind of spot where older couples shared warm soup on rainy nights, and where regulars tipped well because they remembered what it felt like to work hard. And tonight, as the cold drizzle tapped lightly against the wide windows, the place felt gentler than usual. Marisol wished her nerves matched the room. She carried a tray against her chest, trying to steady her breath after the long day. A middle-aged couple waved for their check. A young family asked for extra napkins, and someone at the bar whispered her name for a refill. Everything familiar, everything manageable, until Glenn's voice cut across the counter like the snap of a worn-out branch. "He's here," Glenn said, not looking up from straightening a stack of menus. "Table 6. And don't mess this up, Hale. I mean it." Marisol didn't need to ask who he was. She had heard enough stories from coworkers, stories that felt exaggerated at first, until she realized no one was exaggerating. Adrian Kessler, the tech magnate whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose companies bought entire buildings overnight, had a reputation carved out of cold precision. Staff whispered that if you breathed wrong near him, he noticed. If you inconvenienced him, he didn't forget. She had never served him before, but she had seen him pass through the dining room once. The man moved like someone who owned the road he walked on. She steadied the tray on her palm. "All right," she murmured. "Not all right," Glenn corrected. He tugged his tie until it was painfully straight. "You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't ask questions. His water better be cold and the glass spotless. No mistakes." Marisol offered a small, polite nod, the only kind Glenn tolerated. She adjusted her apron and stepped toward table 6. Her shoes made barely a sound on the polished wood floor. Outside, the Seattle skyline glowed through the mist, lights shimmering like little fireflies scattered across the harbor. Even with the soft jazz humming in the background, her heart beat louder than anything else in the room. Adrian sat with another man, Rowan, if she remembered correctly, a calm figure in a gray suit who always tipped well. Adrian himself looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine photo. Charcoal coat, neatly pressed shirt, dark hair brushed back, expression unreadable. He wasn't talking, but the air around him felt charged, like the pause before a storm. She approached with care, carrying a fresh glass and a pitcher of water. "Good evening," she said quietly, keeping her tone warm but neutral. Rowan smiled politely. Adrian didn't look up. She filled Rowan's glass first, letting the water flow slowly to avoid splashing. Then she turned to Adrian. The glass was perfectly clean. The pitcher was cold. Her hand was steady. She tilted the pitcher, letting the stream fall in a clean, clear line. And then, a tiny shift. A single cube that had been clinging to the inside loosened and dropped, causing the faintest splash. Not enough to reach his hand. Not enough to dampen the menu. Just one small drop landing on the polished table. Marisol froze. She lifted the pitcher back, waiting for Adrian to dismiss it with a wave or ignore it entirely. Most people would. But Adrian slowly lifted his eyes to the table, staring at the single droplet as if it were a personal offense carved into stone. The silence deepened. His jaw tightened. "Glenn." His voice was low, firm, and carried across the dining room like a command struck against metal. Glenn rushed over instantly. "Mr. Kessler, sir, is everything all right?" "This server," Adrian said without raising his voice, "is careless." Marisol opened her mouth. "Sir, it was just—" Glenn hissed. Not another word. He snatched a napkin from his pocket and dabbed at the drop with frantic, almost theatrical precision. "I deeply apologize, Mr. Kessler," Glenn said, face tight with panic. "Completely unacceptable. It won't happen again. Marisol, go to the back. Now." "Oh." She stepped back, hands trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. Her shift had been steady until this moment, and now everything felt as if it were tilting on its axis. The warmth of the diner fell away, replaced by the chill creeping into her chest. She wanted to say it wasn't fair. She wanted to say it was a single drop, but the words never made it past her lips. She had learned long ago that fairness didn't always have a place in rooms like this. Glenn straightened his tie again, as if regaining control. He stepped away from the table, leaving Marisol standing there silent, mortified, unable to breathe comfortably. She turned, trying to gather herself enough to walk toward the back hallway, but her legs felt shaky. Every sound, the clink of a spoon, the rustle of a jacket seemed too loud, too sharp, and that's when she felt it. Adrian's eyes, still on her, not with anger, but with something colder disappointment, as though she'd inconvenienced him merely by existing in his line of sight. She lowered her gaze and stepped away from the table. As Adrian walks away, Marisol feels the weight of something far heavier than a ruined shift settling on her shoulders. Marisol moved through the narrow hallway behind the counter, her breath catching somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The warm hum of the dining room faded behind her, replaced by the heavier quiet of the staff area, the kind of quiet that made every misstep feel louder than it was. She leaned a hand on the metal prep table, trying to steady herself. The stainless steel surface was cool beneath her palm, a small mercy on a night running too warm with embarrassment. She'd worked long enough in food service to know that accidents happened. People spilled drinks, dropped plates, stumbled on their own feet. A single drop of water shouldn't have carried the weight of a catastrophe. Yet, somehow, it had. Not because of the drop itself, but because of who had witnessed it. In another life, she might have laughed about the absurdity of being judged by a man whose entire empire existed in the cloud. But tonight, she could only feel small. Lila Monroe slipped into the hallway, her hair tied in the messy bun she always wore on busy nights. She took one look at Marisol and softened. "Hey, Glenn's in his dramatic opera phase again, huh?" Marisol tried to smile. It didn't come out right. It was just a drop. Lila sighed, leaning against the wall with the ease of someone who had seen too many bad nights go down. With him, it's never just a drop. He's been jittery all week. That's the problem with bosses like Glenn. They care more about impressing the wrong people than protecting their own staff. The words were kind, grounding. Marisol breathed out slowly, her shoulders easing a little. Lila always had a way of making things feel human again, even when the world pushed otherwise. "You want some air?" Lila asked. "It's chilly outside, but it might help." Marisol shook her head. She didn't want to curl inward or disappear. She wanted to finish her shift with dignity. "No, I'm fine. I just need a minute." Lila squeezed her arm before heading back out, and for a moment Marisol closed her eyes, listening to the muffled, clinking, and soft jazz drifting through the door. It reminded her of fall evenings long ago, when she and her mother used to sit by the window in their old townhouse, listening to classical radio and reading aloud from old poetry books. Her mother always said that words had a way of carrying people through storms, even the quiet ones. Marisol wished those words could carry her now. She straightened her apron and stepped back toward the dining room. She had barely pushed the door open when she saw Glenn standing stiffly near the service counter, arms folded and expression carved from stone. He motioned sharply for her to come over. "You can go home after you refill Section 3's teas," he said without meeting her eyes. "I need your hour sheet before you leave." Her throat tightened. "Go home? My shift isn't over yet." Glenn's jaw moved side to side, a tell she'd learned to read like bad weather. "Tonight's not a good night for mistakes, Hale." She felt each word land like another stone in her stomach. This wasn't about the drop. It never was. It was about reputation. Glenn cared more about how the restaurant looked to a billionaire stranger than how it felt for the people who kept it running. She didn't argue, didn't trust herself to. Instead, she lifted a tray from the counter and went to refill the warm apple teas for the older couple in Section 3. They smiled at her the way older folks often did, kind, gentle, grateful for the small courtesies in life. "Cold night out there," the husband said, adjusting his wool sweater. "Hope you're staying warm, dear." "I'm trying," Marisol answered softly, and for the first time that night, the words felt real. She finished their table quickly, then returned to the counter to drop off the empty tray. Glenn handed her a folded piece of paper, her hour sheet for the week, and a look that avoided her entirely. "You can clock out early," he said. "Is everything—" I said clock out. She nodded once, quietly, carefully. She moved toward the staff station, slipped off her apron, and hung it on the hook, where she always did. The fabric felt heavier than usual, as if the night's weight had clung to it. She clocked out with a small beep. The sound oddly final. When she stepped outside, the drizzle from earlier had thickened into a soft rain, misty and cool against her cheeks. Seattle's night smelled of damp pavement and distant pine. Cars hummed along the waterfront road, headlights glowing like floating lanterns in the mist. She wrapped her jacket tighter and began walking toward the bus stop, her breath rising in faint little clouds. A street musician played a slow melody on a saxophone nearby, the notes drifting through the rain like a memory. She paused under the awning of a quiet shop, taking a moment before continuing her walk home. The city felt both large and small, at once alive, yet indifferent. She wanted to shake the feeling of Adrian's cold gaze, the way it had cut through her like she was nothing more than a misplaced detail in his evening. As she stepped back onto the sidewalk, she heard the restaurant door open behind her. Adrian walked out, coat collar raised against the rain, Rowan following a few steps behind. Their voices were low, muffled by the mist, impossible to make out, but their presence alone made the air feel heavier. Adrian glanced briefly in her direction, not long enough to be acknowledgement, just long enough to remind her of the imbalance between their worlds. Then he turned away, heading toward a sleek black sedan waiting at the curb. As Adrian walks away, Marisol feels the weight of something far heavier than a ruined shift settling on her shoulders. The morning settled quietly over Seattle, the kind of soft gray light that made the whole city feel like it was waking slowly. Marisol sat on the edge of her small studio apartment, a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. Sleep had come in pieces, drifting in and out like the faint rain tapping on her window. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the single drop of water on the table and the way Adrian Kessler had looked at her afterward, cold, dismissive, final. Her apartment was modest but warm, filled with little reminders of her mother, a worn rug, a flickering lamp, a framed photo from a sunny day at Lake Union. She touched the frame gently, tracing her mother's smile. "You'd tell me to let it go," she whispered. "You always did." But letting go was harder when rent was due in 8 days, and her bank account sat quietly on the edge of empty. She checked the balance anyway, hoping, somehow, for a different number. It wasn't there. The knot tightened in her stomach, familiar as breathing. A buzz from her phone broke the stillness. "Lila. Heard Glenn sent you home early. You okay?" Marisol exhaled softly. "Trying to be." "Oh." Moments later, "Meet me for breakfast, 11th Street Cafe." Breakfast out wasn't in the budget, but being alone with her thoughts felt heavier. "I'll be there." The walk was cool and quiet. Seattle's drizzle softened the edges of the morning, and the smell of coffee from the cafe drifted out onto the sidewalk like a small comfort. Inside, older regulars read newspapers, their gentle conversations blending with the low hum of jazz. The scene felt like a memory of calmer days. Lila waved from a window table. "Hey. Rough night?" Marisol sat, wrapping both hands around the warm mug the barista set down. "That's one way to put it. He shouldn't have sent you home," Lila said. "He panics around men like Kessler. You know that." Marisol nodded, though doubt pressed on her chest. "It just felt like everything I did was wrong." "Then let me be clear," Lila said softly. "You are not the mistake." The words settled warmly inside her, easing the tightness she'd woken with. Rain traced slow paths down the window, and for a moment, the world felt gentler again. But somewhere across the city, decisions were already shifting, decisions that would pull her life back toward the man she hoped she'd never see again. When Marisol and Lila stepped out of the cafe, the rain had eased into a thin mist that softened the edges of the street. Cars rolled by slowly, their tires whispering across the damp pavement. The city was beginning to wake dog walkers with warm cups in hand, older couples strolling under shared umbrellas, the kind of gentle morning rhythm that usually calmed her. But today, the quiet only made her thoughts louder. She walked with Lila toward the bus stop, hands tucked in her coat pockets. I'll talk to Glenn tonight, Marisol said. I need the hours. I can't afford another short shift. You shouldn't have to beg for hours, Lila replied. But, yeah, I get it. She squeezed Marisol's arm gently before heading across the street. Marisol waited alone at the stop, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. She watched a small family pass by a grandfather holding his granddaughter's hand as they crossed the street. The simple tenderness of it pulled at her. She missed that kind of steadiness, the kind her mother always gave so easily. When the bus arrived, she boarded quietly and slid into a seat near the back. Seattle blurred past the window. Small shops opening for the day, the harbor in the distance, the faint glow of early morning lights. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself she'd get through another day, that she always did. Her phone buzzed again. Not Lila. Not a bill. Not a spam message. A voicemail. From an unfamiliar number. Her stomach tightened. She waited until she was back in her apartment before pressing play, standing very still in the quiet room as the message began. Good morning, Miss Hale. My name is Amanda Bishop, Executive Assistant to Mr. Adrian Kessler. Mr. Kessler requests a meeting with you this afternoon. A car will arrive at your address in 30 minutes. Please be ready. The message ended. Marisol stared at the phone, the world narrowing to a thin, breathless line. A meeting? A car? With him? Her tea from earlier still sat on the table, now completely cold. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but a pull she didn't yet have a name for. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed her life tilting again, the way it had the night before, except this time the shift felt even bigger. She didn't know whether to run, refuse, or open the door when that car arrived, but she knew one thing with unsettling clarity. Whatever waited for her that afternoon would change far more than her next shift. The car that arrived was sleek and dark, the kind that didn't belong on Marisol's quiet street. Even before she stepped outside, she felt its presence through the thin walls of her apartment, quiet, polished, out of place in her world. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the front of her sweater, wondering for the 10th time whether she should even go. Nothing about the situation felt real. She wasn't the kind of person who got summoned by billionaires. She wasn't even the kind of person who got summoned by her own manager without warning. Yet here she was, heart pacing like a soft drum under her ribs as she locked the door and descended the narrow stairwell to the street. The driver greeted her with a polite nod, opening the back door with a practiced motion. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and cedar, a clean, understated scent that made her suddenly aware of the rain on her shoes. She sat near the window, hands folded tightly in her lap. As the car pulled away, Seattle rolled past her in blurred reflections, coffee shops opening for the afternoon, college students hurrying across crosswalks, the moss-covered edges of old brick buildings shining faintly from the drizzle. It all felt strangely distant, as though she were watching someone else's life through a window. She rehearsed explanations in her mind, though she wasn't even sure what she'd done wrong. Was Adrian going to fire her on Glenn's behalf? Demand some kind of statement? The drop of water felt impossibly small compared to the weight of the mystery surrounding this meeting. She tried to slow her heartbeat, reminding herself that she had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of, but her hands still tightened every time the car turned. They arrived at a quiet corporate building near the waterfront, a place she had walked past dozens of times without noticing. The glass entrance reflected the gray sky, and the lobby inside glowed warm and golden against the dim afternoon light. The driver led her only as far as the doors before stepping aside. Inside, a woman waited at the reception desk, a poised figure with a clipped haircut and an air of calm command. This had to be Amanda Bishop. Miss Hale, Amanda said with a gentle professionalism that eased some of the tension in Marisol's shoulders. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Kessler is upstairs. Upstairs. The word itself felt heavy. Marisol followed Amanda through the quiet lobby, past the soft hum of elevators and the faint murmur of people typing behind frosted glass partitions. They stepped into an elevator, the doors closing with a smooth, almost silent click. As the lift began to rise, Amanda glanced toward her with a hint of something human beneath the polished exterior. Please don't be nervous, she said. Mr. Kessler isn't as intimidating as he seems. Marisol managed a small breath of a laugh. He seemed pretty intimidating last night. Amanda's expression softened. He has his moments, The elevator chimed softly, and the doors opened onto a floor that felt impossibly quiet. The walls were lined with tall windows overlooking the harbor, the view stretching far enough to make the city feel small beneath a wide gray sky. Amanda guided her into a conference room with long, clean lines and a polished table that reflected the muted afternoon light. "Please wait here," Amanda said. "He'll be in shortly." And then she was alone. Marisol stood near the window, letting her fingers trace the edge of the cool glass. Boats drifted across the harbor like small white brushstrokes. The room felt too large, too empty, as though she were standing inside a held breath. She tried to gather herself, remind her thoughts to stay steady, but each passing second stretched a little longer than the one before. She heard footsteps approaching, measured, certain, unmistakably his. Her pulse jumped, and she forced herself to turn before the door fully opened. Adrian Kessler stepped inside with the same quiet intensity she remembered, though something in his expression was different now, less like a man surveying his world, and more like someone carrying an unspoken weight of his own. He closed the door behind him and took a moment before looking at her directly, as if choosing his words with unusual care. "Miss Hale," he said, voice low, steady. "Thank you for coming." The rain outside softened to a hush, and the room seemed to settle with it. She waited, her hands clasped in front of her, trying not to let her nerves show. Adrian didn't sit right away. He seemed to weigh the air between them first, his hands resting lightly on the back of a chair as though grounding himself. The softness in his posture surprised her. The man who had barely acknowledged her existence the night before now looked, if not gentler, then at least less distant. He drew a slow breath and finally spoke, his voice lower than she expected. "I owe you an apology for what happened yesterday." For a moment, she wondered if she'd misheard him. People like him didn't apologize to people like her. But he held her gaze, steady and sincere, leaving no doubt that he meant every word. She felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion rise in her chest. "You don't have to," she began. "I do," he said, quiet but firm. "I was not at my best, and I let my frustration become your burden. That was unfair." The words sat between them, warm in a room that had felt cold moments earlier. Marisol didn't quite know how to respond. She wasn't used to powerful people owning their mistakes, much less to her. She clasped her hands loosely, letting the silence stretch for a moment before answering. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate you saying that." He nodded once, as if her acceptance mattered more than he expected. He moved to the opposite side of the table, resting his fingertips lightly along the edge. Up close, the tension in his shoulders was easier to notice, a tension that spoke of long days, heavier decisions, and perhaps more quiet regrets than he cared to admit. "I asked you here," he continued, "because something happened this morning that concerns you, and concerns me as well." Her heartbeat quickened. She resisted the urge to take a step back. "Concerns me? I don't understand." Adrian tapped a key on the tablet resting beside him, and a document appeared on the screen. He turned it slightly so she could see. It was a report neatly formatted, crisp margins, tidy headers. Her name appeared near the top. Her stomach tightened. "This was forwarded to my personal office," he said. "At first glance, it appears to be an internal evaluation from your workplace. But the timing, the language used, something about it didn't sit right." "Oh." Marisol leaned closer, scanning the text. Several statements were flatly untrue. One line stated she had a pattern of carelessness. Another noted customer complaints that had never existed. A final section recommended reducing her hours for the stability of staff morale. Her breath caught. "This isn't real. Glenn would never write something like this." Adrian met her eyes, and the steadiness in his expression shook her more than the document itself. "Someone did." The room felt too still, too quiet. She tried to process what she was seeing, yet her mind kept stalling, snagging on the possibility that someone had wanted to hurt her reputation and had gone through trouble to do it. Why would this end up with you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said slowly, "it was accompanied by a request for the name of my legal counsel, should I wish to file a complaint against you for unprofessional conduct." She stared at him. "That makes no sense." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain outside had quieted to almost nothing, leaving the vast windows as still as polished stone. Marisol felt confusion, fear, and something sharper, threading through her thoughts. A sense that the ground beneath her life was shifting in ways she didn't yet understand. Adrian lowered his voice, leaning slightly forward. "Miss Hale, someone wants you gone, and they're using me to do it." Her breath faltered, caught between a warning and a revelation. And before she could form a response, before she could even choose which emotion to cling to, she heard his next sentence. "It's clear you're involved in something you don't know about." The words hung in the air long after Adrian stopped speaking, as if the room itself needed time to absorb them. Marisol stood very still, her hands lightly gripping the back of the chair in front of her. For a moment, she couldn't quite tell whether the pounding in her chest came from fear or disbelief. She searched Adrian's face for any sign that this might be a misunderstanding, but his expression remained steady, serious without being harsh, concerned without crossing the line into pity. I don't know anything about this," she said quietly. "I've never been involved in anything except doing my job and trying to take care of my life." "I believe you," he replied, and the simplicity of the statement startled her more than the accusation itself. "This isn't your language, and it isn't your behavior." He slid the tablet a little closer to her. "It reads like someone trying to turn a small moment into a weapon." The memory of the previous night flashed unwelcome through her mind. The drop of water, Glenn's tight jaw, the way he had shooed her off as if her presence alone threatened the restaurant. None of that seemed connected to a corporate-style document, but the discomfort at the center of it all felt familiar. Someone had been watching her too closely. "I don't understand why anyone would do this," she whispered. Adrian's gaze drifted briefly to the window, as though watching the slow sweep of the harbor might offer some insight he had yet to voice. "Unfortunately, when businesses grow," he said, "so do the number of people willing to manipulate small details for their own gain. Sometimes it's to curry favor. Sometimes it's to hide their own mistakes. And sometimes—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marisol sank slowly into the nearest chair, her palms resting flat on the polished surface. The view outside stretched wide and silver under the low afternoon light, but the beauty of it did little to steady her. She felt as though she had been pushed into a story she didn't choose, one she couldn't predict, and one she didn't feel equipped to handle. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice almost steadier than she felt. Adrian considered the question with a kind of thoughtful gravity she hadn't expected from him. "Now," he said, "we find out who wrote this and why they wanted me involved." He paused, then added, "And we make sure you're not blindsided by whatever else they may try." The warmth that flickered faintly in his tone unsettled her. She had spent the last 24 hours convincing herself that he was simply a powerful man who didn't see people like her. But now, standing in his quiet, glass-walled office with the gray sky stretching behind him, she saw someone different, someone who noticed too much, someone who understood the weight of unintended harm. "I don't want trouble," she said. "I just want to work and keep my life steady. That's all." "I know," he replied. "But someone else brought trouble to you, and we can't ignore it." A soft knock on the door broke the moment. Amanda stepped in with a folder pressed neatly against her arm. "Mr. Kessler," she said, "Rowan is finishing the background check you requested. He says he'll have more in a few minutes." Marisol blinked. "Background check?" Adrian lifted a reassuring hand. "On the document, not on you." Then, to Amanda, "Thank you. Bring him in as soon as he's ready." Amanda nodded and slipped out, leaving the door whispering close behind her. Marisol rubbed her thumb along the grain of the table. "You think this was written from inside the restaurant?" "It's possible," Adrian said. "But whoever drafted this used language modeled after corporate compliance reports. That suggests someone wanted it to look official, someone who misunderstood how my team actually works." She swallowed, unsure whether the room felt too warm or too cold. "Should I be worried? Really worried?" His answer came slower this time, but not unkindly. "You should be aware, and you should be careful." Then, after a moment, "But you shouldn't be afraid. I'm not going to let this be used against you." The promise in his voice felt almost unreal, like hearing a familiar melody played differently, softer, steadier. She wasn't sure why it mattered, but it did. She rose from the chair, drifting toward the window without entirely meaning to. The view of the harbor stretched out before her, pale light glinting across the water as a ferry cut a clean line through the waves. From this height, everything looked small and controlled, manageable. She wished her life felt the same. Behind her, Adrian stepped a little closer, though still at a respectful distance. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Rowan mentioned a detail that concerns me more than the document itself." She turned, her pulse tightening again. "What is it?" Marisol steadied herself, fingers lightly brushing the window frame as she waited for him to continue. Adrian watched her with the same careful attention he'd given the troubling document, as if he were cataloging details, trying to understand what didn't yet make sense. "Rowan said the writing style in that memo doesn't belong to an insider," Adrian explained. "It matches someone trying to imitate professionalism, not someone who actually works within a corporate system." He paused, letting the implication settle. "Which means it came from someone who wanted to sound credible, but doesn't understand the language they're copying." She frowned. "So, someone pretending to look official?" "Exactly." Her breath thinned. The restaurant replayed in her mind faces, voices, small interactions she hadn't thought meant anything. A coworker cutting glances she dismissed. A customer who lingered a little too long by the service station. The assistant manager who always seemed to hover when she clocked in. The world she had assumed was harmless suddenly felt full of corners. "Does this mean someone followed me?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. "Or watched me outside of work?" Adrian softened. "We don't know. Not yet. But we're going to find out." Before she could ask anything more, the office door opened and Rowan stepped inside, clutching a stack of printed pages. His expression was tight, cautious, like someone carrying information he wished he didn't have. "I ran the metadata," Rowan said, "and I checked the originating device." He handed Adrian the papers, then looked briefly at Marisol with something close to sympathy. It didn't come from her workplace. It came from a personal laptop, recently purchased, no registered user. Paid in cash. Marisol felt her mouth go dry. Why would someone do that? Why go to that much trouble? Rowan hesitated. "Because whoever did this didn't want to be traced. And they wanted it to land on your desk, sir." Adrian scanned the report, his jaw tightening. He walked a few steps away, as though distance might help him process the growing web of connections. Marisol remained by the window, feeling smaller with every passing second, caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming. "There's more," Rowan added reluctantly. "The phrasing in that memo, it wasn't generic. Whoever wrote it targeted her specifically. They referenced recent events from the restaurant details that weren't public." Marisol sank into the chair again, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "So, someone at the restaurant helped them? Or someone with access to your routines," Rowan replied. Adrian turned back toward her. "Is there anyone you've had conflict with? Anyone who seemed unusually interested in your work or your schedule?" She shook her head helplessly. "Not like this. People get stressed, sure, but no one hates me enough to orchestrate something like that." Rowan tucked his hands into his pockets. "Well, someone bothered to try." Silence rolled over the room. Heavy, unsettling. Marisol sensed Adrian weighing options, legal, personal, logistical, all shifting behind his eyes. But beneath the layers, she sensed something else too. A growing protectiveness he hadn't voiced yet. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I don't want you walking home alone for a while. And don't go back to the restaurant until we know more. Whoever did this wanted to push you toward me for some reason. I'm not going to risk them escalating." The words should have frightened her, but instead they anchored her. For the first time since stepping into the high-rise, she felt grounded, not safe, exactly, but not abandoned to the unknown. "Adrian," she started, unsure what she even meant to say. But before she could finish, Rowan's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He checked the screen, his expression shifting again. "Sir," he said slowly, "you're going to want to see this. A second document just appeared. Same writing style. Same anonymous source." He glanced at Marisol. "And this one mentions her by name." Adrian moved to take the phone, but his eyes were already darkening with something sharp and unmistakable. Determination and worry. Marisol felt a chill move through her, cold and precise, as if someone had traced a finger down her spine. Something was tightening around her life, piece by piece, and she didn't yet know who held the thread. Then Rowan exhaled, almost reluctantly, and said the words that closed the chapter like a door clicking shut. "It says they know where she was last night and who she was with." The room settled into a heavy stillness after Rowan spoke, as if every sound in the high-rise decided to take a step back. Marisol felt her breath catch, the simple knowledge that a stranger watched her life turning the air thin. She folded her hands together to stop the faint tremor in her fingers. Adrian moved closer, not abruptly, but with a calm steadiness that made the moment feel less like panic and more like preparation. "We'll handle this," he said, "but you're not going back to the restaurant until we know exactly what we're dealing with." She nodded, though a part of her still resisted the idea that her quiet, predictable routines could somehow become dangerous. "I keep to myself. I go to work, come home, and that's it. I don't know anyone who'd follow me." That may be why they think you're an easy target," Rowan said gently, as if choosing each word with care. "Whoever this is, they've been watching long enough to feel confident." A small shiver passed beneath her skin. She found herself turning toward the window, watching the ferry cutting across the harbor. The movement comforted her steady, purposeful, untouched by whatever trouble tangled around her now. "Did the second document say anything else?" she asked without looking away. Rowan hesitated. "Only that whoever wrote it wants Mr. Kessler's attention. They're trying to pull him into something using you as the pressure point." Marisol finally turned back. "Why me? I'm nobody to him." Adrian's expression shifted just slightly. "You're not nobody," he said, the tone quiet but certain. "And someone out there knows that I don't ignore things like this." The sincerity in his voice warmed the cold center in her chest, though she wasn't sure she had the right to let it. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself, trying to hold still. Another knock sounded at the door. Amanda stepped in again, her face more serious than before. "Sir, the downstairs security desk just called. Someone was seen outside the building asking questions about her." Marisol's pulse jumped. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Who?" he asked. "They didn't give a name. Just said the person left when they couldn't get any answers." Amanda paused. "They described him as a man in his 40s. Dark jacket, no ID." The three of them exchanged looks, uneasy, waited. Marisol took a slow breath. "I didn't think my life was important enough for anyone to bother with," she said softly. Adrian shook his head. "Someone disagrees, and until we find out who, you're staying close." He picked up his phone, already moving toward the door with intent. "I need to call in a few people I trust. This is bigger than we thought." Marisol watched him step into the hallway, Rowan following a beat behind. The office felt suddenly too quiet, too large. She pressed a hand to her heart, steadying herself as the truth settled deeper. Whatever this was, she was in the center of it now. And as she stood there, framed by the wide windows and the cold light of late afternoon, she felt the shift subtle but profound of a life no longer moving on the safe, predictable path she once knew. She had never served him before, but she had seen him pass through the dining room once. The man moved like someone who owned the road he walked on. She steadied the tray on her palm. "All right," she murmured. "Not all right," Glenn corrected. He tugged his tie until it was painfully straight. "You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't ask questions. His water better be cold, and the glass spotless. No mistakes." Marisol offered a small, polite nod, the only kind Glenn tolerated. Boats glided through the water like steady, unbothered shadows, unaware of the storm knotting itself around her life. She pressed her hands together, trying to steady the swirl of thoughts, fear, confusion, and something she hadn't expected. Trust. Not in the situation, but in Adrian's determination to protect her from it. A few minutes later, Adrian returned, his footsteps firm but not hurried. He closed the door behind him with quiet restraint, then sat across from her close enough to show intention, far enough to give her space. "I've arranged for someone to take you home," he said. "Not a driver. Someone trained to notice things most people miss." She blinked. "Is that really necessary?" "For now," he answered. "Yes." His voice carried a calm certainty that softened the edge of her fear. She nodded, accepting what she still didn't fully understand. Rowan entered soon after, tablet in hand. "We pulled additional camera footage," he reported. "The man asking for her wasn't familiar. Not a customer from the restaurant. Not someone from our staff. No ID, no badge, nothing." Marisol's stomach dipped. "So he could be anyone." "Anyone," Rowan agreed quietly. Adrian leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Did you notice anything unusual last night? On your way home? Anyone walking too close? A car that didn't seem to belong? She shook her head. No, I just walked home like I always do. He nodded, but his brow tightened with concern. Unspoken worry hung between them, settling like a weight neither of them could fully name. Just then, Amanda appeared in the doorway once more. Sir, the security team sent up the latest still frame. You should see this. She handed Adrian a printed image. He studied it, then slowly passed it to Marisol. Her breath caught. The photo showed a man standing near the building entrance, shoulders angled just enough to keep his face in shadow. But the posture, the tilt of his head, felt disturbingly familiar. She couldn't place it, yet something about him tightened a knot deep inside her chest. Do you recognize him? Adrian asked. She hesitated, eyes scanning the blurred outline again. I'm not sure. But he looks like someone who was at the restaurant recently. Someone who watched people more than he ate. Adrian exchanged a knowing look with Rowan. That helps, Rowan said. We'll cross-check. Marisol swallowed hard, setting the photo gently on the table. She felt the shift in the room tense, concentrated, as if the circle around the truth had narrowed. Then Rowan's tablet buzzed sharply. He glanced at it, and his expression changed in a way that made her skin prickle. Sir, he said slowly. Another message just came in. Same anonymous source. Adrian straightened. What does it say? Rowan looked up uneasy, cautious, almost apologetic. It says they want to meet tonight. The request lingered in the air long after Rowan spoke, settling over the office like a low cloud before rain. Marisol felt the room tilt slightly, not from fear alone, but from the realization that whoever had entangled her life in shadow now wanted to step forward. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold still against the trimmer building inside. Adrian didn't raise his voice, but a new steel threaded through it. They want a meeting, he repeated. With who? Rowan checked the message again. The wording is vague. It only says, bring her. No time, no place. Just that. Marisol's breath caught. Why me? What do they think I can give them? Adrian shook his head. It isn't about what you can give. It's about pressure. Whoever's behind this thinks involving you forces my hand. The words landed heavier than she expected. She wasn't used to the idea of mattering, certainly not enough to be used as leverage. She glanced down at her hands, noticing how small they looked against the smooth fabric of the sofa. Are you going to respond? She asked quietly. Not yet, Adrian said. We don't step into anything blind, and certainly not with you in the middle. Ugh. Something softened in her, though she tried not to show it. His concern wasn't loud or dramatic. It was careful, steady, the kind that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Rowan continued. We traced where the message was sent from. Public Wi-Fi, no camera coverage. Whoever it is, they know how to hide. A faint chill moved through her. She'd spent so many years believing anonymity kept her safe blending in, staying out of trouble, living quietly. Now, anonymity felt like the thing trapping her. Adrian rose and walked toward the window, staring out at the harbor as if searching for a path through fog. This feels orchestrated, he murmured. Someone wants more than my attention. They want control. Marisol watched him in the muted afternoon light. There was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before, something old, something that hinted at mistakes he didn't often speak of. For a moment, she wondered what ghosts in his past might have made him so cautious now. What do we do next? She asked. He turned back to her, expression settling into calm resolve. We're not meeting anyone tonight, not without knowing who they are. But won't ignoring them make it worse? Maybe, he said. But walking into their hands would make it far worse. He took a seat again, leaning forward slightly. I need you to stay somewhere safe. Not your apartment. Whoever followed you knows where you live. And definitely not the restaurant. She hesitated. Then where? Before Adrian could answer, Amanda slipped quietly into the room, her voice low. There's another issue. A message was left at the downstairs desk. Handwritten, no envelope. Marisol's heart skipped. What does it say? Amanda handed the folded note to Adrian. He opened it slowly. His eyes darkened, but he didn't hand it over. Adrian? Marisol whispered. He finally looked at her, the worry in his gaze no longer hidden. You need to see this. He placed the note gently into her hand. Her fingers shook slightly as she unfolded the paper. There were only 5 words written in rushed, uneven print. "You can't protect her forever." Her breath vanished. She stared at the message, then at Adrian as a single realization sank in. This wasn't random. Someone out there knew exactly how to reach her and how to reach him. Marisol held the note as though it might burn through her fingers, her pulse thudding in her ears. The words didn't just threaten her, they reached into the quietest corners of her life, the parts she never expected anyone to notice. Adrian took the paper back gently, folding it once with the kind of care that made the message feel even heavier. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "That's the only way people like this operate. They don't confront, they unsettle." But why?" she asked, her voice thin. "I'm not important. I'm not part of your world. You're not just anything," he said firmly. "And whoever wrote this understands something. Hurting you is the fastest way to get to me." The sincerity in his tone unsettled her in a different way. Warmer, steadier, more personal than she expected. She lowered her gaze, feeling a flicker of something she couldn't name. Rowan stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We checked cameras again." A single drop of water shouldn't have carried the weight of a catastrophe. Yet somehow it had. Not because of the drop itself, but because of who had witnessed it. In another life, she might have laughed about the absurdity of being judged by a man whose entire empire existed in the cloud. But tonight, she could only feel small. Lila Monroe slipped into the hallway, her hair tied in the messy bun she always wore on busy nights. She took one look at Marisol and softened. "Hey, she startled. "Adrian, that's too much." "It's not enough," he said, soft but unshakable. "Until I know exactly who's doing this, you're not walking anywhere alone." A flush warmed her cheeks, part fear, part gratitude. She didn't want to depend on anyone, especially someone whose world felt so far above hers. But she also couldn't deny the comfort in his certainty. Amanda re-entered, carrying a slim envelope. "This came for you as well," she said, handing it to Adrian. It was slid under the lobby door, different handwriting. He gave her a brief nod before opening it. As soon as his eyes moved across the page, his expression shifted, lines of tension sharpening along his jaw. "What is it?" Marisol asked. Adrian hesitated just long enough to make her chest tighten before passing the paper to her. It wasn't a threat. Not directly. It was a printed photo, blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Her, walking home last night, alone, jacket pulled tight, unaware of the shadow 2 steps behind her. A cold wave rolled through her, tightening every muscle. This can't be real." "It is," Adrian said quietly. "And it means we're dealing with someone who isn't guessing where you go. They're following you." Rowan leaned closer, studying the image. Whoever took this wasn't trying to hide their distance. This is someone confident, someone who knows we'll see the photo, but not the photographer. Marisol's throat tightened. "What do they want from me?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "They don't want you," he said. "They want me worried." She looked up at him, and for the first time, saw real fear behind the calm. Not fear for himself. Fear for her. Before she could speak, Rowan's tablet chimed sharply. He glanced at the screen, then froze. "Sir," he said quietly, "we have another message. This one's different." Set. Adrian's voice steadied. "What does it say?" Rowan swallowed once. "It says the meeting is no longer optional, and they've already chosen the place." The evening light outside the office had dimmed to a soft blue-gray, the kind that made the harbor look quieter than usual. Marisol stood near the window, arms wrapped lightly around herself as the weight of the newest message settled over her. Someone had chosen a place. Someone expected her to be there. The idea felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's story. Adrian remained near the center of the room, a quiet steadiness radiating from him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He simply absorbed the implications, the way a man measures a storm before deciding which direction to move. Rowan hovered nearby, scrolling through the message again. "They sent coordinates," Rowan said finally, "and a time. No signature, no instructions beyond, 'Don't be late.'" Marisol turned, her voice soft. "Where is it?" "A parking lot near the old pier," Rowan replied. Not abandoned, but quiet after dark. Adrian's expression cooled. They want isolation. They want control of the scene. She stepped closer, feeling the faint tremble of her own uncertainty. Are we going? No. Adrian shook his head. We don't walk into a setup. But if we don't, she said, what if they escalate again? They already followed me. They know my building. They know where I was last night. The sentence trailed off, though the fear behind it lingered. He softened at her tone. I won't put you in that situation. Not for any reason. A warmth settled in her chest, unexpected, complicated. She wasn't used to anyone speaking with that kind of certainty on her behalf. Besides, Adrian continued, whoever this is doesn't want a meeting. They want leverage. They want unpredictability. Those messages they're trying to make us chase shadows. And, Rowan nodded. It's a trap, plain and simple. Marisol exhaled slowly, letting the truth steady her. Still, something tugged at her conscience. A small, persistent thought. What if they're targeting me because I'm the easiest way to hurt you? If that's true, ignoring them might push them harder. Adrian held her gaze, the evening light reflecting in his eyes. That's not your burden to carry. But her heart whispered otherwise. He walked to his desk and placed both hands on its edge, leaning forward as if grounding himself. We need more information. I'm calling in a private security consultant I trust. Someone who handled sensitive incidents for my family years ago. Rowan raised an eyebrow. You mean Hartman? Yes, Adrian said. If anyone can piece this together, it's him. Marisol stayed silent, unsure how she fit into the new plan. She traced her fingers along the back of the nearest chair, grounding herself in the familiar texture. What do I do? She asked. Adrian looked at her gently. For tonight, you stay with the security team until we get answers. That feels like hiding. It's protecting yourself. He corrected softly. There's a difference. She wanted to believe him. A part of her did. Amanda's knock broke the moment. She stepped inside, a quiet tension in her posture. Mr. Kessler, the lobby desk reports that someone came by again. They asked for your whereabouts. And hers. The room stilled. Same description as before? Rowan asked. Amanda nodded. Adrian rubbed the bridge of his nose, then straightened. We're done reacting. From here on, we take control. He crossed the room and approached Marisol with a calm, steady presence. You won't be alone tonight. And I want you to trust me when I say this. Nothing is going to happen to you on my watch. Her breath tightened, not out of fear this time, but from the sincerity in his voice. For the first time since everything began, she believed him. And yet, a shadow of doubt lingered not about him, but about the lengths their unknown watcher might go. Just as that thought crossed her mind, Rowan's tablet buzzed again. He checked the screen and blinked. Sir, he said slowly. The coordinates they sent. There's motion detected at that location. One person. Waiting. Adrian's jaw tightened. Waiting for who? Rowan met his eyes. For her. The words hung in the room, heavy enough to still the air. Marisol felt her heartbeat settle somewhere in her throat as Rowan handed the tablet to Adrian. A grainy camera feed flickered on the screen, an empty stretch of pavement near the pier, washed in pale, yellowish light. And there, standing alone near a rusted railing, was a man. He didn't move. He didn't pace. He simply waited. Marisol stepped closer, squinting at the screen. The man's face wasn't clear, but his posture, shoulders forward, arms loose at his sides, felt unsettlingly intentional. He's expecting us, Rowan murmured. No. Adrian corrected quietly. He's expecting her. A small shiver worked its way down Marisol's spine. Do we know who he is? Not yet, Rowan replied. He's careful. He's keeping his face turned from every angle the cameras can see. Whoever this is, he knows exactly where the blind spots are. Adrian studied the screen for a long moment, jaw tightening with a slow, controlled anger. He wants us to think he's in charge. And isn't he? Marisol whispered before she could stop herself. Adrian turned to her, expression softening just a fraction. Not for a second. Yet the unease pressing at the back of her ribs didn't ease. She kept her eyes on the grainy figure. The longer she looked, the more a single question echoed through her mind. Why me? Why now? Amanda entered quietly, carrying 2 phones. Sir, The burner number they used just pinged again, only for a few seconds. Adrian took one phone from her. "Trace it. We tried," she said, shaking her head. "It bounced through 3 towers. Whoever's doing this knows exactly how to stay anonymous." The room fell into another tense silence. Marisol lowered herself into the nearest chair, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking. She had never thought of herself as someone who mattered enough to be targeted or protected. Yet here she was, caught in the center of something she couldn't see the edges of. Adrian set the phone down and crouched slightly so he could meet her eyes. "Listen to me," he said. "This man, whoever he is, thinks he can intimidate you. Thinks he can intimidate us. But we're choosing the next move, not him." She nodded, but her breath still trembled. "I just don't understand why he wants me involved at all." "You were at the wrong place, at the wrong moment," Rowan said softly. "Or the right place, depending on his motive." Adrian shot Rowan a look that told him to stop there, but the words had already taken root. Right place, wrong moment. It all felt like threads she couldn't quite see, pulling tightly around her. Rowan's tablet buzzed again. He sighed and raised it. Another message. Same anonymous source. Adrian straightened, waiting. Rowan read silently, then exhaled in a way that made the hairs on Marisol's arms lift. "It says," he murmured, "if you want this to end, send her alone." The room went still, completely still. Marisol's hand instinctively rose to her chest. Adrian froze, eyes darkening in a way she hadn't seen before, sharp, protective, dangerous. "No," he said immediately. "Absolutely not." Ugh. But before anyone could say another word, Rowan added quietly, "There's something else." Adrian didn't blink. "What?" Rowan turned the tablet around. A new picture filled the screen. Marisol gasped softly. It was the same man on the pier, but this time, he wasn't alone. Standing a few feet behind him was another figure. Smaller, hunched, clutching something in both hands. Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper. "And sir, this second person looks like they've been waiting for her too." The office felt smaller the moment the message appeared. She already knows them. Marisol tried to recall a face, a voice, anything that might fit the shadowy figure on the screen. Nothing came, just a faint tug in her memory she couldn't place. Rowan zoomed in again. The smaller figure stood by the pier light, clutching something to their chest. Their posture wasn't threatening, it was tense, nervous, almost pleading. "They look afraid," Marisol said quietly. Adrian glanced at her. "And afraid. People make unpredictable choices. We need to be careful." Hartman arrived moments later, taking in the situation with a practiced calm. "Second figure isn't bait," he said after one look. "They're waiting for her, and whatever they're holding, they think it matters." Marisol felt a shiver of recognition, not of the person, but of the emotion. Someone desperate. Someone who didn't know where else to turn. Could they be from her past? Rowan asked. Hartman shrugged lightly. Sometimes people return to the only kindness they remember. That struck something deep inside her. Adrian placed a steady hand on the back of her chair. "We go together," he said. "No one approaches alone." She nodded, though her heartbeat quickened. The idea of meeting a stranger in the dark should have terrified her. And yet, something about the smaller figure felt different, like a forgotten thread tugging her forward. Minutes later, they were in the car heading toward the pier. Marisol kept her gaze on the blurred coastline outside, feeling a quiet ache of anticipation she didn't understand. When they arrived, Hartman raised a hand for everyone to stop. The pier light flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. "There," Rowan whispered. The two figures waited, one confident and still, the other small and trembling. Marisol's breath caught. She didn't know who they were, but something in her heart whispered, "You've crossed paths before." The wind off the harbor carried a soft chill as Marisol stepped a little closer to the pier's edge, the light above flickering gently. The smaller figure shifted nervous, uncertain, but didn't run. The object in their hands trembled slightly, reflecting the glow of the street lamp. Hartman and Adrian stayed a few steps behind her, close enough to protect, far enough to let her lead. "It's all right," Marisol said quietly, more to calm herself than the stranger. The smaller figure lifted their head. Their face was still obscured by the hood, but their voice came out thin and wavering. You don't remember me, do you?" Marisol blinked. I'm not sure. Should I? A shaky breath escaped them. They held out the folded object with both hands. You helped me once. A long time ago. She hesitated, then reached forward and took it gently. The paper was worn, edges soft from being handled many times. When she unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a photo old, grainy, showing a younger version of herself standing beside this same person. She recognized the moment then. A brief kindness, a forgotten afternoon outside the old community center where she once volunteered. She'd helped a frightened teenager fill out a form and find a safe ride home. She had forgotten. They never had. I didn't know who else to go to, the figure whispered. They said you were in danger, and I couldn't let that happen. Behind her, Adrian exhaled with a mixture of relief and understanding. Marisol stepped closer, her voice warm and steady. You're safe now, and I'm glad you came. The figure nodded, a small tear slipping free. I owed you. You once helped me when no one else did. Marisol folded the photo carefully, her heart full in a way she hadn't expected. Kindness, long forgotten by her, had circled back at the moment she needed it most. Sometimes, when the dust settles after a storm, we finally see what truly carried us through. As Marisol stepped away from the pier that night, surrounded by people who once felt like strangers, she understood that the twists and shadows of her journey hadn't been meant to break her, but to lead her toward the kind of connection she'd spent years believing wasn't meant for her. And in the quiet between the harbor winds and the soft shuffle of footsteps, she realized that a single act of kindness from long ago had circled back with a power she never expected. There's a tenderness to stories like this. The kind older listeners often recognize a softness shaped by years of watching how life bends, heals, and surprises us. It reminds us that redemption rarely arrives with noise. It comes gently, like an old friend knocking on the door just before supper, or the glow of a porch light guiding someone home after a long winter road. Marisol didn't simply find safety that night, she found belonging, a reminder that family isn't always the one we're born into, but the one we gather piece by piece through compassion and courage. And so the lesson lingers. Love steadfast, patient, imperfect, has the power to rewrite the stories we thought were already finished. Unconditional kindness can change the course of a life, even when we don't remember giving it. And no matter who we are or where we've been, every soul deserves a place to be cared for, protected, and seen. As many older Americans know well, happiness often comes quietly through small mercies, shared meals, or the hand we reach for during moments of uncertainty. Just like a porch light glowing in the early evening, a gentle act of goodness can guide us through the darkest stretches of the road, reminding us that we're never walking it alone. So tonight, as you sit back in your favorite chair or finish the last sip of your coffee, take a moment to reflect on the people whose kindness shaped you and the lives your own kindness may have touched without you ever realizing it. If this story warmed your heart or brought back a memory worth keeping, let us know. Comment 1 if it felt meaningful, or 0 if there's something you'd like us to tell better next time. And if this story found a quiet place in your heart, feel free to stay with us for the next one. Stories grow richer when a community listens together.